For those out there listening, there's one person on this show who grew up a diehard Chicago Bears fan, so much so that he cannot still not forget the decision that Lovie Smith once made before a preseason game and deciding which quarterback it should be to start by flipping a coin to make that determination.
Yeah.
This individual has been such a big Bears fan that he's now instilled in his son the fact that he's got to root for a team that, I guess, got a nice win yesterday, but still can't seem to figure it out. And evidence of that, well, it would have been that they had the shot. They had a chance at getting the GOAT, the all-time great, Tom Brady. Lee, please play the sound.
There was a lot of reasons to choose Tampa, and I made about 18 criteria why. And there was things all the way from the salary, obviously, to the weather, to the facilities, to how great the players were. And ultimately, Chicago was a team, and I never told that story before. They were very stealth in their recruitment. I was seriously considering them. But in the end, it came down to Tampa.
But it just kind of throws that in there.
Y'all just didn't have enough to offer Tom Brady.
I mean, Jonas, would you have offered yourself up? I mean, what could you have done to help entice the offer to get him to the Bears?
Here's what's interesting about it is that
the answer would be yes.
Yeah.
By the way, you notice he didn't put the Browns in there? Like, at no point did he put my Browns in there. It hurt a little bit when I heard the Bears. I was like, wait, what? I was like, Browns had a pretty good roster, didn't they? I was like, what? Never contemplated going there.
I wonder if it was the path. I wonder if he looked at the NFC as maybe being an easier path. Maybe. I mean, the Bears were a playoff team that year, and that was with Trubisky, and they ended up losing to New Orleans in the playoff game, and then it was the next week that I think Brady beat Breeze in Breeze's final game, and that was part of the them getting all the way to
cold-blooded, man.
For his sake, I'm glad he didn't, because what he was able to do, the fact that I felt like everything lined up the way it was supposed to be. First of all, Tampa Bay was ready to go. Jameis Winston, it's not like he wasn't putting up numbers. He just put up some of the wrong numbers. He threw 30 picks the year before. So they were there. They were ready. They seemed like they were ready to go. He shows up in Tampa and ends up winning a Super Bowl, and it's in the middle of COVID, and they end up playing the Super Bowl at Raymond James. So it just felt like everything lined up and the stars aligned for him. If he goes to Chicago, I just have zero faith that they would have figured out a way to either build around him or figured out a way to let him kind of take over and go in whatever direction he wanted to go to. And had he done that, who knows? I mean, do him and Matt Nagy see eye to eye? Do they, I think Bill Lazor was the offensive coordinator there. How does that change how they go about things? I'm happy for his sake that he didn't go, because their history at quarterback, they would have figured out a way to screw it up somehow, some way. So, but
that's kind of sad to hear, isn't it?
Well, I mean, it's what it is. I mean, I wonder who else was also part of the conversation, though. Obviously the Raiders, we've heard that story.
I wonder what this was 17, 18 reasons. I mean, there had to have been that for all the teams, right? He's probably got a criteria of, you mentioned salary, you mentioned, offense system, all that kind of stuff, which I'm sure people are going to, everyone's going to adapt to whatever he wants to run. But he mentioned Bruce Arians. He mentioned, a bunch of reasons as to why in Tampa, but I also think it would have been equally as interesting to hear why not. And we should give a lot of credit to the Philadelphia Eagles. Reason being is, and not to go back to my time calling games, but when you're calling a blowout, this is the sort of material that gets brought into the broadcast because the game's so uncompetitive. So with Philly not showing up, this ultimately allowed us to have this sort of content for today's show. So thank you to Philadelphia, the Eagles. Thank you to Tampa, maybe for laying on the drumming and everything that's come along with it.
Yeah, that is fair. They kind of, led to this whole discussion being had. By the way, did you notice, if you watch Brady talking about the teams he was going to, he was holding the actual note cards that he had written down.
We think they were. I mean, it could have been props. Who knows?
Oh, you think so?
Let me ask you.
I don't know. I mean, maybe Giselle took them and she's like, "I'm not letting you. I'm going to take these."
Part of the settlement. Oh, you're right.
Maybe.
Hey,
I mean, they have value.
Yeah.
Do you guys? I mean, what did you think of his performance? Because there still continues to be like mixed reviews or mixed feelings about.
Oh, I don't care what anyone else thinks. I mean,
What do you
here's what I'll say is I think he does a good job. I think he's new at this, and he'll continue to settle in. And I think honestly, the path that he's taking is much better than how things went with Tony Romo and CBS. I mean, it's like everyone's, oh my gosh, he's the greatest of all time. And then like a few years later, now people are like, does he even watch football anymore? Can he stop stepping on Nance? I mean, it's an entirely different buildup, I think. So I think he does fine. I think he does. I enjoyed listening to some of the stories. I enjoy listening to everything else.
And he's probably going to get what game is he calling next week? Like, I don't even know if they've announced that as of yet. But
if you could vamp for me, I think I can give you a good idea.
I also think, look, he's 4 games into his broadcasting career. He's trying to find his rhythm with all this stuff, and he's had the Cowboys a bunch of times in a row. Then he gets thrown back in Tampa. Like, he hasn't had and I don't know if this will ever happen because it's Brady.
Wow.
Just a normal situation to call a game. Is he calling the Patriots?
Can I give you guys a reason why they have not announced probably what game he's calling next week?
Yeah, why is that?
It is an awful slate. Just an awful slate for Fox, if I'm being honest.
Yeah, it's bad.
Here are the options. This one could be enticing because of what he said, and it might be a close game now. The Carolina Panthers at the Chicago Bears. Okay, could be one. The Browns at the Washington Commandos. You've got the Dolphins at the New England Patriots.
That's not a bad
which
one.
probably makes the most sense.
Yeah, that's not a bad
but
one.
you get Tyler Huntley starting tonight on Monday Night Football. Tua will not be back for that matchup, and the Patriots, as we saw yesterday, are not very good. Probably the one of the better games, I think, just because of how this division plays out, would be the Cardinals at San Fran, and then finally, you've got the Raiders at the Denver Broncos.
Yeah, it won't be that one.
It would be interesting if it was, only because of the agreement for the limited.
Oh, that's true. I would say Cardinals-Niners is the best matchup, but if they really want to squeeze more out of listen to when Tom Brady's calling games, you never know what he's going to say. Then Panthers-Bears would make sense based on him.
No, I mean, because that story's been told now. I think the more interesting one would be if he went back to New England and he talks about some stories from there.
I think
that would
be a good one.
That would be interesting. I will say this about the games. Even though they don't look very enticing as far as the juiciness of some of the matchups, you do have really small spreads. I mean, the Broncos are giving 2 at home to the Raiders. The Patriots are getting 1 at home to the Dolphins. The 49ers-Cardinals is the biggest spread. The Niners are giving 7.5. The Commanders are laying 3.5 versus the Browns. Bears laying 3.5 versus the Panthers. So all fairly competitive with the exception of one game. So,
and by the way, I would also like to point this out. New England stinks, and Miami, who knows who's going to be playing quarterback at that point. That's probably the only way you would want to tune in to watch this game is if Brady's on the call back in New England. But that's going to be another situation where he goes back to his old stomping grounds, and he just hasn't really had a normal broadcast yet to where he's just calling a game. There's always a storyline or something attached to it, and maybe that's just how it's going to be with him moving forward. But that's why I'm reserving judgment until he just is in the mix and just calling a game as a broadcaster. And again, maybe
you don't like what he's done so far.
No, I'm fine with it. Totally fine with it.
So if you go through each week, I'm trying to think, how competitive have any of the games been that he's been calling? Obviously, week 1 wasn't. Week 4 wasn't.
Saints, Cowboys.
I'm trying to go back through. Which games did he call? He called Dallas for the first 3 weeks?
Yeah. Saints, Cowboys was a blowout.
It was a blowout?
Yeah.
And then that was week 2?
Yep.
And then week 3, he
what
also
was the
called.
Storyline for that one?
Well, no, I think the general point, really, the Ravens blew out Dallas until the very end of the game when the Cowboys came back in the fourth quarter. The point of why I'm bringing that up is, when you have blowouts, you have to tell other stories. You have to try to find a way of engaging the audience because the game is so bad, and it I don't want to say it exposes you in any way as a broadcaster, but those are the moments where I would make the case that you really earn your paycheck outside of the big moments where you want to be on point. those moments are the ones where you've got to have some additional analysis. You've got to be able to provide more depth because you have time. Like, in blowouts, you can kind of talk over plays a little bit more, have more of a conversation, tell stories, tell stuff, about what's coming ahead, maybe in incoming weeks. You can have all those moments then. When it's a tight game, no one wants to hear that crap. People want to hear you analyze the game, the situation, the decision-making, what's happening, why it happened, why it didn't. That's what they want to hear then. He really hasn't had that opportunity because all the games he's called have been so, I guess, lacking any sort of competitiveness. Maybe with the exception of how things got at the end of that week 3 game with Dallas and Baltimore. So that's the other part of like the when you asked about how people referred to him or what critics are saying about him, LaVar. It's hard when you're just calling blowouts, man. Because the other thing that naturally happens is when you're calling a game, you know who thinks you stink? The team that's losing.
Yeah.
They hate hearing the guy who's in the booth that's looking down, who's speaking reality into their life. They hate realizing like their team's losing and they're doing, this today, or they're not doing this today, right? So they end up being the ones that are most vocal, much like if you've got like online reviews. It's like, did anyone have such a great experience that they're going online to give a 5-star rating and write an entire paragraph review? No. It's mostly people who feel like they're wronged. They go online, give a crappy review, write a paragraph, because now they want to try to stick it to that person. So that's typically how it works, at least in my mind. And so on the flip side of it, people who are like, oh yeah, I think he called a pretty good game. They're usually the team that like kicked the crap out of the other team. And they're not going to like go to Twitter to be like, hey, I thought he was awesome. So I don't know. I hope he gets a more competitive game for his sake. I guess in regards to the question about like what you think about him as a broadcaster, but even this week, like as far as their pick, tight spreads, I mean, maybe it'll lead to a tight outcome in a better game.